Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, once again, welcome to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. At this time, it is our custom to go around the room introducing ourselves. My suggestion is that you pause for a little bit before saying your name so that people eventually can get everybody's name after a few go-rounds. I know it is difficult for me too. I know faces, I know names, but it's hard to connect them at times. After that, I'll introduce our speaker, and he'll give a Dharma talk, and we'll take it from there. So my name is Oswaldo Garcia.
My name is Jim Bucher.
Dan.
David Lewis.
My name is Freddie.
Josh.
Evan. Anthony. George.
Jerry.
Jose.
Mike.
My name is Jerry Jones.
My name is Cass.
Gerald. Ralph.
I'm Tom Bruein.
Dennis.
I'm Doug Von Cross.
Hank.
I'm David.
I'm Henry Rabinowitz.
Peter. My name is Ben.
I'm Mark.
My name is Michael. I'm Kei Matsuda.
Patrick. I'm Stuart. Joe Castrovinci.
Paul. Fred Wenzel.
Peter.
I'm Wayne.
Mike. I'm Jeff.
Lee Robbins.
Snarf.
Brad.
I think we got everybody. So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. His name is Tom Bruein. He's been long associated with the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Tom is a psychotherapist that practices in San Francisco with primarily gay clientele. In his practice, he combines traditional Western psychotherapy with Buddhist principles. He writes a bi-weekly column in the Bay Times, which is called The Examined Life. So a lot of you may have been familiar with what he does with those columns. And those well, he'll make an announcement if you want to get on the mailing list for that column. So his talk today will be on the practice of heartfulness. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you. Well, you're all looking exceptionally sacred today. I said that to a nun when I was 14 and she slapped me. The only difference is that this time I actually mean it. Practice. I would like to try an experiment. I would like it if you would participate in an experiment that'll last just a couple of minutes. I don't know how this is going to come out, but it really intrigues me. And it basically involves doing 2 one-minute meditations. And I'll give, imagine like you're in a retreat and someone is giving you the meditation instructions to follow, and they'll be a little different each time. And I just want to see if there's any difference. And I'll end each meditation with this little bell. Okay, so is that okay? First meditation. For the next minute, sit quietly, close your eyes, anchor your attention on the breath, and be mindful of whatever arises. Okay, and if you could just sort of check in and see what your state is, your emotional state, your mood at the moment. So the second meditation, here are the instructions. For the next minute, sit quietly, anchor your attention in the breath, and open your heart to receive everything that arises. So what I'm curious about is, were the meditations exactly the same pretty much for you? Was there any difference in your experience of the two meditations? And if so, what was the difference? Anyone?
You know, for me, the second one was more difficult. And I think for me, the second one was more difficult because it seemed more complicated to me. I don't really know. Maybe I don't quite understand what it means to open my heart to receive something. I forget exactly. I'm kind of paraphrasing.
Open your heart to receive.
And whereas the first one, maybe the first one, I was actually opening up my heart because I wasn't thinking about it.
Oh, interesting. Paradoxical effect. Thank you. Other Lee?
More or less the opposite experience. I found the second one, I felt more contentment, and it seemed easier, and what it seemed like was that the resistance struggle was less. Things would rise up and they would pass away rather than stop that.
Great, thanks.
So the first one, I found myself centered mostly on my thoughts. It was very inward and sort of closed, just observing what was going on in my mind. But in the second one, I felt more open to something beyond myself. So it was more outward focused.
Great, thanks. Sir?
Mine was similar to Tom's in the sense that the second one, I could visually feel my heart opening. And so my breaths were deeper and lighter. And I just found it like I wanted it to last 20 minutes versus the minute.
Oh, okay, thank you. One or two more?
I noticed in the second one, I had a little smile growing on my face. And I felt just more at ease with what was happening rather than being in it. It was kind of like a little voice like, oh, hon, yeah, there it is, you know. I guess compassion for what was happening. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One more, okay.
For me, the first one felt very spacious. Whatever arises. The second one felt demanding somehow and brought about some sort of contrariness for me, that I had to do something particular. And so it felt a little tighter in a certain way.
Okay, thanks. Can I ask, how many people felt no difference between the two meditations? How many people? So most people felt a little difference. Some positive, several positive, some negative. The reason I did this is, my work as a therapist often involves teaching mindfulness practice to patients, and who, for the most part, aren't Buddhists. They're not interested in anything Buddhistic. They want to end their suffering, and they want some relief. And I found I had beginner's luck the first few times I taught meditation. People just took off, and all kinds of wonderful things happened. But then I began to run into trouble, especially with patients with anxiety problems. Some people said it actually made it worse. And they didn't like it at all. The practice was difficult. And so that kind of fascinated me. Why is that? Because, I found this such a soothing, calming practice. What is it? And what I began to discover was, when I really explored with some people, was that it was the term mindfulness that threw some people off. Because for many people, the term mindfulness suggests something analytical, emotionless, detached, aloof, indifferent. I don't think it does for everybody, but for a lot of people in our culture, mind, is sort of non-physical. It's in here. It's it's about thinking. So being mindful has something to do with thinking for many people. Whereas so I began using the term heartfulness. I began saying, open your heart to what's present. And no one's alike. So there's some people who would find that they don't want that, And I'm not in any crusade, by the way, to change the word. Mindfulness is the term we use, the term we have. But I was just interested in what are the resistances with the patients. And so I found that many people found the term heartfulness a little easier to take, because the term heart suggests something more warm, more affectionate. So I began using it. What's interesting is that when I've talked about this with some really experienced practitioners, a couple of monastics, a lot of them said, well, there's no difference. What is the difference between being mindful and being heartful? Because, in the Pali language, the term for heart and mind, chitta, are the same term. They didn't make this distinction, that we kind of think, you feel here and you think here and you feel here. We don't really believe that, but there's that sense that your heart and your mind are separate. The term, for mindfulness is sati, which comes from the Satipatthana Sutta, and it really means something more like recollectedness, which is interesting. Recollection, because mindfulness is about, I think, remembering. It's sort of a coming home, a kind of a waking up. But if you were to say, let's practice recollectedness, people would think it was a memory exercise or something. So it's just interesting the different connotations that the word has. But I've been finding in my own practice and with other people that if I remind myself that meditation is about heartfulness, it's about opening the heart to all that is here. That my meditation changed a little bit. And I see this in some other people too. And again, it doesn't work for everybody. One of the things one of the reasons I think I found this important with patients has to do with the inner critic. We tend as a culture to be very hard on ourselves, very judgmental. Eckhart Tolle, in The Power of Now, says this: you've probably come across mad people in the street, incessantly talking or muttering to themselves. Well, that's not much different from what you and all other normal people do, except that you don't do it out loud. The voice comments, speculates, judges, compares, complains, likes, dislikes, and so on. It is not uncommon for this voice to be a person's own worst enemy. Many people would live with a tormentor in their head that continuously attacks and punishes them and drains them of vital energy. It is the cause of untold misery and unhappiness, as well as disease. So recognize any of that? I mean, I've met very few people who don't have some kind of inner critic. I think it's a function of being in a very individualistic culture, a competitive culture, and so most of us very early on adapt to it by developing a critic, somebody, sort of a parental figure internally that's watching us, judging us in how we're doing in life, and much of the time finding that we're not doing very well, Let's see, what was I going to say about the inner critic? One of the problems with the critic is that while it speaks with a tone of parental authority, developmentally, we actually get it when we're about 5 years old. Developmentally, it's a very young kind of thing, which is one of the reasons that its judgments are so sweeping and irrational. You never do anything right. You're a loser. I mean, it's very different from adult kind of discriminatory wisdom. It isn't that at all, right? And that's one of the things that makes it so problematic. And one of the things that makes it so problematic to deal with is that most of us also think deep down that we need it. I mean, I always when I question it with people, they usually say something to the effect that, well, I need it because if I didn't have this, I'd never get anything done. I'd never get my butt off the couch. I'd never accomplish anything. And we have this idea, it's in the culture, that shaming, blaming, kind of threatening and judging motivate us. I mean, now psychologically that might not be very wise, but it's widely believed that we need to be critical of ourselves in order to get anything done, and that a more compassionate, allowing, kind approach to our lives. We're not sure that we think that would be a little, I don't know, hippy-dippy or something. It wouldn't be so. It wouldn't work very well. But in fact, the research shows that self-compassion has a whole lot of benefits. There is actually research on self-compassion. It reduces self-criticism, lowers stress hormones like cortisol, increasing self-soothing, encouragement, and other forms of resilience. It can also help to heal any deficits in receiving caring from others in our childhoods. That when you develop a self-caring, when you develop, instead of the inner critic, more of a nurturing parent, that it makes up, to some degree, for the deficits in feeling loved that we had as children. So this is one of the reasons that I encourage a lot of people to do heartfulness practice, because the inner critic is so pervasive in many people's lives that they're not even aware they're doing it. And so one of the resistances to being mindful is they'll sit down to be mindful, and then they'll start observing, their failings, the ways they lose, memories of how they screwed up in the past. You know what I mean? A lot of negative stuff will come to light, but they won't recognize that it's negative. The inner critic is kind of in the background, judging the experience, but they're just seeing, quote, reality. It's because they're not differentiated from the inner critic. They're so identified with it. So one of the things to do in practice, I tell people, is begin by noticing the attitude you're taking toward what arises. Right? Notice, you're afraid, say, you're confused, you're anxious. Are you mad at yourself for those feelings? Because many people have a kind of contempt for their suffering as part of the inner critic. If you're suffering, you're clearly doing something wrong. Right? Now, the first noble truth is supposed to be really the treatment for all of this. It's actually a liberating truth. All sentient beings suffer. In other words, just because you suffer doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. This is how it is. Right? This is our condition as sentient beings, and so, which immediately suggests that the wise response to your own suffering, initial response, is compassion, is to open your heart toward it. So when the inner critic is back there, we're relating from it. So what we want to do in heartfulness practice is relate to it, right? To see self-contempt, self-criticism arising, and to be able to label it. Say, oh, there's the inner critic again. And then how to deal with it, I usually find fighting with it doesn't work. Jack Moran was here a while back. He comes here now and then. He talks about problematic sexual turn-ons and how the first thing people try to do with sexual desires that they don't like is fight them, which vastly adds to their power. What you resist persists. The same thing is true with the inner critic, that when we fight it, get angry, it fights back. Excuse me, I've had laryngitis for a couple days, so I may lose my voice in a few minutes, and then you'll have to talk. So what was I saying? So the attitude, I think, the heartful attitude I see toward the inner critic that's helpful is to recognize it's there, first identify it, and then second, remember that the inner critic is actually trying to help you. It was something we developed very early on to try to help us get through life, not get into trouble, not do things wrong, and so on. So that it actually, ironically, very strangely, comes from self-love, paradoxically. Ultimately, that's what it was intended to do, is to help you. So that you don't actually hate the self-critic, or the inner critic, you send compassion into it. Envelop it in, when you see it, oh, there it is, and actually send compassionate energy into the inner critic. Counterintuitive, I think, for many people. So, anyway, what I have been finding is that in my work with clients is that I've started using the term heartfulness, and it really seems to help people more than when I use the term mindfulness for many people. Not for everybody. And in my own meditation it has helped too, because I remember that really what mindfulness meant to the Buddha and his followers was about opening your entire being to what's here, right? It was not an activity in here. It was an activity of your whole being. I mean, they didn't even know. No, they didn't even know the thought occurs in here, and those, right? And that's something fairly recent. In fact, most people felt that thought occurred here. The Pueblo Indians, this is a diversion, but anyway, when Carl Jung visited the Pueblo Indians, they talked about how the white man is crazy. They told him white men are crazy. Why are they crazy? He said, well, they think here. And he said, where do you think? And he said, we think here. Duh. It's just very interesting. So it's about, the term for me opens us to a more self-compassionate, heart-centered approach to practice. Not everyone needs to think of it this way, but I think it helps with some people. So, in other words, it helps you get an attitude, focus on the attitude you're taking toward your experience, which often is in the background. and focus on, I'm angry with myself for suffering. I'm mad at myself for being anxious. So that is front and center. And then it encourages you to send compassion into what you're experiencing. Can we do another brief, this will not be so brief, what I would call a heartfulness meditation? Just take a few minutes and I'll just demonstrate kind of what I mean by this and see how it affects you. So get into a relaxed posture and close your eyes and bring to mind the feeling of being with someone you know who really cares about you. It might be a close friend, family member, could even be a pet. Anyone for whom you have felt the experience of unconditional love. And let yourself remember what it feels like to matter to this being who wants you to feel good and do well in life. And just imagine that being is kind of behind you and is seeing into you and is radiating compassion into you. And it's as if they can sense everything you're feeling and thinking. And they're just sending waves of compassion into it. And let yourself bask in that compassion like a puppy in the sunlight. And let it open your heart. Now, bring to mind, say, a difficulty or some suffering that you may be experiencing in your life right now. And notice how you feel in your body when you remember that. Maybe the contraction or the pain of it. And imagine that this being who cares about you is sending waves of compassion right into the center of your suffering. Not to change it, not to do anything with it, but simply to love you in it. Let the compassion sink deeper into you, into your deepest patterns of clinging to yourself. And completely surrender to that compassion by letting go of this visualization of the other person and just merging with the energy of compassion itself. Merge with luminous wholeness beyond separation between self and others, deeply letting be. Notice any grasping in the body and let it go, surrendering to the natural power of the body to embody you. Let the breath come into its natural power, breathing all the way in and all the way out. Let the mind unfurl and fall completely open, free, all-pervasive. Sense the boundless openness of your awareness that has no boundaries. Infinite openness and translucence, pervasive and open like the sky. And let that meditate you. So, anyone want to comment on how that was? What happened for you? You have to say something. We've got 15 minutes left. Sure.
A mildly disturbing notion that grasping was the point. That was the thing I was supposed to do. That was, you know.
Grasping was the point. How so? I don't know.
That there wasn't infinite amount. There was only a certain amount of compassion, and I had to therefore grab onto that sense.
That's really important. That's what your mind does. I mean, so what I would do, well, I don't know what you did with it, but what I would do with that is note that idea is there. Note how it makes you feel in the body when you think it. Don't argue with it or say it's true either. And just send your benefactor's compassion into that. That's how we work with these kind of beliefs. That's really interesting. Yeah, there's a finite amount of compassion and we have to grab it. Yeah, you're not the only one. Other people? Sure.
I had the sense, similar to what you were saying, in the observation that people are often wondering, what would I do without it? You know, in my case, I was feeling the sense of unworthiness, and my benefactor was, when I began to feel their compassion, I was discombobulating. I was confused at first, like, what then? But and when I could relax into it, then I felt a sense of relief and vulnerability at the same time.
There was a letting go.
Yeah.
So it was a positive experience.
Yeah.
Great. James?
I was very sort of moved at how rarely I do that I allow compassion to really penetrate into the core of my suffering. It felt like a totally novel strategy.
Wow. And you've been meditating for years.
Yeah, really to no effect. You know,
Was that the inner critic? Or was it mine? I didn't mean to imply that.
Inner critic is too polite a term for what I have.
What would you call it?
The demon of invalidation. But what was... I remembered my dog, because I adored my dog, and his love was true. But I disqualified his love to deal with my suffering because he doesn't know about my tank self, and he just thinks I'm nice. So he doesn't. His love was invalidated because of the quality of my suffering.
Interesting. Yeah. So then you have to pull in a human being or somebody who with the
Well, they wouldn't know.
with the same level of confusion that we all have.
There's no help.
Yeah, it's kind of
I'll keep working with this. But
it's kind of hopeless, isn't it?
Well, but that brings me to the inner judge. I mean, when I said there's the demon of invalidation, at one point I actually said, "Get out of my house! You're telling lies." It felt like an evil presence.
Mm-hmm. How is it when you do that? Is that good?
Yeah, that works.
It works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea of befriending that extreme judgmentalism doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I don't think it does work for everybody. The thing that happened that most people that I work with have at the beginning is they're really afraid of their inner critics. The inner critic starts in and they're going, like a 5-year-old being scolded by a parent. And it's really, when you can begin to see it, that's just the inner critic. That's what I learned, that's not reality. That's this. And when you can begin to stand up to it and even yell back at it, that's often progress. And to think of it as just one voice among many in your head, but it presents itself as the voice of reality. It is authoritative. It is the final word, right? Yeah. I like what was it? The demon of invalidation. One of my clients called it his butt-kicking machine. In the 12-step programs, they talk about the committee. I don't know why exactly. I guess there's a bunch of them or something.
Panel of judges.
A panel of judges, yeah. So.
Initially, I like the term that you used about bathing in compassion. And I brought in an X, and it was too intense. And I know that's my issue of not letting my guard down. But then when I brought in my ex's dog, who I get often, I felt really relieved, and I felt all this unconditional love that I do experience when I hang out with his pet.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that all means, but I love my quiet time with his pet.
Yeah.
Usually once a week.
That's why we love dogs. I use a dog in my this Samantha, this beautiful Springer Spaniel that was my friend's dog. And every time she saw me, she just went crazy. She would moan and lick my face. It was like, isn't this wonderful? And it was great. And I remember that, and it really helps. Although I guess I imagine that she can understand everything I'm feeling. I mean, I just let myself think that.
You're right.
Most of the time. One of the things about this, any other, anyone else? I got this meditation, I got it from several sources. It's a shortened version of the Tibetan form of loving kindness meditation. Because in Tibet, instead of phrases, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, they use visualizations. Imagine someone sending love into you. I have found that more helpful often than regular metta meditation. Because again, the phrases are thoughts, they're ideas. They do help to some degree, but I found this form of imagine someone loving me. Rick Hansen actually wrote out what I read to you was from Rick Hansen. He wrote the Buddhist Brain. He's a neuroscientist neuropsychologist in Marin County, who's associated with Spirit Rock. And what he says about it is that the power of this visualization is that the experience of receiving caring primes the circuits in your brain to give it, both to yourself and others. So that's the whole idea, is that you imagine someone loving you, and in a way it's a mental trick, because it's your compassion that is being accessed, right? It's all going on in your brain. But by imagining it coming from someone else, you trigger something, which every time you use these circuits, they become stronger, right? Neuronal pathways that are used frequently strengthen. You start forming habits. So to do this kind of meditation on a regular basis, theoretically should strengthen self-compassion. So I guess what I'm saying about mindfulness is what I've learned about heartfulness is what I do now whenever I sit down to do a period of mindfulness is I just try to check in with what's here now, but also what needs to be loved now. What needs my attention and kindness now? And another thing, you might even try this now if you want. Another thing you can do is put your hand on your heart. Just that simple gesture of putting your hand on your heart can evoke a kind of compassion. Just the gesture itself. Very interesting how that is. I wanted to say something about that. I forgot what it was. So that's really, I think, all I had to say. I think maybe we could have a little discussion about some of this. Questions, comments.
I'll add something which follows up from the thought about giving and receiving compassion. So I ended up visualizing my partner, but even more strongly, one of our cats. And so the cat, this is the cat that likes to be petted and so forth. And it has now learned, without my attempting to teach it, to pet me.
Really?
So it takes its little paw and it goes like that. And it's also learned that no, for humans it isn't good to bite them. They don't like that, so it stopped doing it. So it puts its paw up and it pets me, and it seems to like that as much as my petting it. And
Wow.
I was interested in the reciprocity.
Wow. So that's a good visualization, right? Mm-hmm. To see your cat going. Interesting how many of us use animals. People are hard. You know, even our relationships with people are so complex, even the ones we love. You know, and with animals, it all seems so, much of the time, seems so simple. It reminds us of the purity of compassion, how simple it is. So that's the main thing that I've been learning about heartfulness. When I use the term heartfulness, it has helped me personally to understand how critical of my own experience I am. I think most of us, to one degree or another, act on the assumption that there must be some way of doing life so that it isn't so hard, right? And our suffering is evidence that we're screwing up. I mean, it's a really, when you say it in plain English, it's obviously absurd, but it's back there, kind of in our unconscious, you know, that our suffering is shameful. So that's why I see heartfulness as so important. So when you become aware of suffering, to be very careful to pay attention to the attitude you take toward it. And if you're critical of it and so on, to really work at opening your heart to it. The thing about this meditation that we just did is that it starts as a compassion concentration practice, right? That you imagine the benefactor sending love into you. And then, as I went into it, what happens is we let go of the visualization, emerge with the energy of compassion, and then you just open your heart. And it ends with standard mindfulness instructions. Just be aware of what's here. What's really interesting to me is that if I start with making sure I'm being compassionate toward whatever arises, the mindfulness deepens. So that's why I always begin now with that. The mindfulness steadies. Because, you know, there are a lot of emotions, a lot of things we experience which work contrary to mindfulness. Anxiety, rage, deep fear, anxiety. Those kind of emotions get in the way of it. Compassion is one of the most supportive experiences we can have for our practice. And it feels great, right? Although, another thing I've noticed, and then I will shut up. When people start doing heartfulness practice, in my office especially, what will often happen is that deep sadness will come to the surface. They'll feel deeply, deeply sad. And often we'll think that that's an indication that, well, I don't want to go here again, or that they're doing it wrong because I should be feeling wonderful, right? I'm meditating. But really what that is, I always see that as a good sign, because what happens when people start the practice is often they realize how much suffering they really have. And accessing the love they feel for themselves, the fact that they don't want to suffer, a sadness wells up. And if you stay with that, send compassion into that and let it be, the sadness is a kind of a relief. Do you know what I mean? Talking about? I mean, the sadness is a really good sign often.
So it strikes me that this meditation is sort of the opposite of what's more common, and that is sending compassion out, right? Meditating on sending compassion out to others, to the world, these circles, these concentric circles that flow outward. But we're not so good at opening up and receiving and coming in.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, so I like this as sort of the other side of the coin, and it reminds me of a benefactor meditation I was led in, where behind me was not just one person, but all my ancestors. Everyone who has built a life and had children, and all in hopes of everyone doing better along the way.
Yeah.
Even if they were a little, in real life it may not have been so nice, but imagining that they've moved on to a higher realm where they truly have compassion.
Yeah.
And everyone's behind you. The teachers from high school who took an interest in you and everything, and it becomes very...
the whole army, yeah. Yeah, that is how the Tibetans do it. It isn't just one person. And it can be the whole Sangha going back to the Buddha, all the generations of practitioners for 26 centuries who are supporting you, and it's great. Again, and the way they do the meditation, of course, is you receive it first, give it to yourself, but then they do this typical thing that is done in meditation, where you begin sending it outward. So you receive it, and then you give it back to eventually all sentient beings. Your friend, neutral person, enemy, and then all sentient beings.
It become like a lens, right, where it comes in.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's a long practice, though we couldn't do that today. But they also say that the first part is the most important, because what you can't love in yourself, you're not going to be able to love in others. Because in a way, there being no self, what we're talking about are mind states: anger, anxiety, depression, blah, blah, blah. And those are the mind states, not my mind states. My greed, my delusion, and so if I'm going to be compassionate toward that in others, I have to be deeply familiar with it in myself and not turn from it. See it, know it, and have compassion for it. So that Alan Watts said one time, sometimes we owe it to other people to be selfish. And what he meant was something like this: focus on developing your own compassion for yourself, and the rest begins to follow.
That reminds me of the first retreat I went to with James Barris and Carol, somebody from these names, they don't hear her name so often. And she gave the first, about 3 or 4 days in, she gave the first metta retreat, and it started with the people in the room and went out in concentric circles, and I was just all aglow and in ecstasy, and she says, and now bring that same love into yourself. And I went, and I really felt I'd been tricked, because there was such a barrier to bringing that to myself. I mean, it was so big and so glowing, and then
Yeah.
bring it to myself, it was like, I really, in some ways, felt I had been tricked because I couldn't do it.
You got mad.
I didn't get mad, but it was like, it didn't work, so I thought it was some sort of, maybe I got mad, but I didn't feel anger as much as, darn it, I feel tricked, you know.
Yeah.
And that really, really helped, that feeling, to realize I had tons of love for everything outside of me, and then bringing that to myself was so, so difficult.
Yes, and you're not alone in that, and that's why this kind of, I said it was a trick, to begin to imagine a benefactor, someone else loving you. And then, because actually you're accessing your own love, it's all going on in your own head. But we're like that. We're very, very hard on ourselves. And often we're much easier and more forgiving of other people than we are of ourselves. It's very strange. One more and I guess we have to stop.
I'm very aware of how cultural some of this is, and in the tradition that I practice, we're very we notice that these traditions tend to come from other cultures that have a different baseline of self-love or self-acceptance versus our version of self-loathing that is more prevalent here.
Yeah.
So the idea that we would start with a compassionate practice to be able to sit, I think, is a given in most cultures. Just sitting meditation
is
an act of kindness and gentleness,
yes.
and a touching of the tender heart. Mm-hmm. And we tend to lose that because it's often not stressed in the instructions that we're given.
That's right.
Which need to be a little more culturally sensitive.
I think that's exactly right. In a way, mindfulness practice is it's an act of self-love, and it's a practice of self-esteem because it's based on the assumption that what's going on in here is worthy of your attention, of your careful attention and interest. But you're right. I think
so. Just to comment on the exercise that we did at the beginning. When you say be mindful of what's arising, my translation from instructions that I've been given is that already.
Yes.
So I just wanted to comment on that because I think it's very different to give that instruction to somebody who has practiced, and we all come from different traditions here probably, so our instructions have been very different. So the response to those, to the language, the particulars of the language.
That's right. That's right.
It's very different.
I think many experienced practitioners would see no difference between these two instructions at all. That's what I'm doing in meditating, is being mindful and opening the heart. They mean the same thing. The thing about culture, there's a famous story about the Dalai Lama meeting with Americans who were talking about low self-esteem, and he couldn't understand the concept. He went around and said, do you have this? Do you have this? All the Americans had it. And none of the Tibetans could figure out what does that feel like? Low self. How can you not, Very interesting how, this is very culture bound. So, but since we're all Americans, that's fine. Okay.
Thanks so much, Tom. Do you want to make any announcements specifically?
Oh yeah, that call. I write that biweekly column. If you, it's in the Bay Times, but if you want to receive it biweekly by email, on the coffee table out by the couch there, I wrote a little sign-up sheet. You won't get any advertisements or political rants or cute puppy pictures or anything. It'll just be the column every other. Okay, that's it.
And let's hear from our host.
Yes, so good morning. I'm Ken Lassiter, and I'm the host this morning. So please stay for the social period and enjoy cookie and tea. If you use teacups, please wash them and put them back on the racks. And there's also a sign-up sheet. So if you'd like to stay in touch with this group, please leave your email address and street address. And often, as the social period ends around 12:30, the people gather around the front door to go out and have lunch together. So if you're interested in doing that, look for that group near the front door, in finally, I'll be coming around with a donable and suggest a donation is $8, and your generosity is appreciated to support this Sangha. So thank you very much.
Any other announcements? Yes, sir.
Hi. Hey, Tom, thank you very much for coming today. It's always a pleasure to hear you.
Thank you.
And next week, we have open discussion, and usually the facilitator has a topic. We break up into groups, and it's a great way to get to know other people in the Sangha.
See no other announcements, so I guess it's time for us to put our hands in a circle. Tom, would you like to lead us through the otherwise?
Why do you do it? Read this thing. Okay.
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness, which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, and live believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.